The proximity to the center of circulation, combined with the mountains of upstate South Carolina and western North Carolina, enhanced the wind threat from Helene. How did we get here? Let's take a look at the path of Hurricane Helene. Not necessarily that we got a more direct impact in Florida, who had it as a Category 4, but when you factor in, and I think this is the heart of the question you were answering with, is that when you couple it with that terrain, it magnifies the impact of the disaster afterwards.
I don't even think that we talked much about the angle of approach. This thing curling northwestward around the upper low. If it had just come up and if it curled to the northeast, let's say, well, then that puts the mountains on the other side of the circulation. That could have changed things quite a bit. But with it curling in the eye of the remnant eye wall, passing off into Tennessee, well, then you're really pushing and accentuating that angle, basically perpendicular to the mountain slope, which is the worst thing that you can do because it just amplifies the upward motion.
With hurricane force winds up to 106 miles an hour, that brought down trees and power lines across the region. And it impacted the local National Weather Service office, charged with issuing warnings and alerts across the entire region. You see, they're based in upstate South Carolina in Greenville, Spartanburg, and they too not only were living the storm, but working through it. Spokesperson Tricia Palmer talks about what it was like inside their office.
Trying to message a storm of the magnitude of Helene, when we're talking about a once-in-a-generation event, a once-in-a-lifetime event, whatever wording you want to use, a catastrophic event, is extremely difficult. If you look at the 4-day totals, whether one site got 20 inches of rain or whether a site got 30 inches of rain, it would be different for any individual site. But overall, probably about a third of the rainfall was from the predecessor rainfall event. When Helene came, there was nowhere for the rain to go. We're constantly trying to message to our partners, this is one for the record books. This is the big one. We were telling our emergency managers, we were telling our media partners, and we're having to make those really tough calls to emergency managers. And those were hard conversations to have. The National Weather Service, we don't really have a direct interface with the public like you folks in the media do. Our best way to reach them is via social media. And so we send it out on Facebook, on X. We need to get this message, this hard-hitting message out to the public. We got comments later from people outside of the Carolinas saying that they saw it and they got scared. And they picked up the phone and called family members. And there was one comment that I won't forget, that this person called a family member in the mountains and read it word for word to this family member. And this family member said, okay, I'll leave. And so the family with 3 kids left. We know that our partners in emergency management, they got no sleep after the event really got going. So we were safe in our little bunker at the National Weather Service. And so our lack of sleep is no big deal compared to what they went through, which was absolutely devastating. Anytime you have a loss of life on your watch, there's always questions that go around in your head. What could we have done differently? What could we have done better? I struggled over the weekend because I knew what our partners were going through. These are their communities. We have first responders out there in the community rescuing people, dealing with loss of life in their families, and there was nothing I could do to help. So that was difficult for us. We had our forecasters, just about everybody lost power for different lengths of time. I lost power for 5 days. Was I prepared for my kids to be out of school for 2 weeks? No. And how do you handle that? I'm driving in, and it took me an hour to get into work, navigating around trees, and then there's a tree that falls down, that I see fall down, and a thought passed through my mind, what am I doing? A tree could fall on my car, and my kids could lose their mom. But my son was, no, we got this. You go help your people. You go help the people here. I got this. I got my little sister. I got this. And I remember looking around at our staff, and we've got some folks who have been there for a long time, close to retirement. And I'm looking at those younger folks. This is the defining moment of their careers. Buncombe County told me that they remembered one of the things that our hydrologist said during a conference call either late Thursday night or early Friday morning was, catastrophic doesn't describe what's about to happen to you. And the emergency manager who told me that said that was earth-shattering for him. It's like, the hydrologist just told us this. What's worse than catastrophic?
Evan, we keep hearing the term PRE, a predecessor rain event. What is that?
Yeah, so these are events that we often see to the north of hurricanes or tropical storms. And last year, that's what we had. We had this upper level system over the eastern United States that drew up moisture from the tropics from Helene into western North Carolina. It's like an atmospheric river, if you've ever heard of that. But it's often what we talk about on the west coast is atmospheric rivers. Over here with the hurricanes, their predecessor rainfall events.
So days ahead of the hurricane arriving, days before the first drop of rain from Helene, it's raining here.
Absolutely. It poured for 3 days. Yeah.
At what point did you realize that those two things together, the PRE and the hurricane, were going to create the situation that it did?
I think there was great concern even after the first night. We were not supposed to have six.
And the first night being Friday or Wednesday?
It's a great clarifying question.
Helene,
right, Wednesday night.
Okay.
So Wednesday night, we weren't supposed to have more than an inch or two of rain, and suddenly we had 6 or 7, which was fairly unprecedented for Asheville. That was one of those moments where even if it had stopped raining on Thursday, that combined with Helene would have been too much.
Right, because it wasn't until daybreak Friday that Helene's rain and wind were actually arriving here in the Carolinas. Wednesday night, as you know, is our typical podcast night. So Wednesday night we were doing our show and we were going to be speaking with meteorologists all across the region. Well, I remember pretty clearly, and we'll take a look at the clip here, but we kept losing them to flash flood warnings, but also tornado warnings because things were ramping up 3 days before Helene arrived. We're taking a live look right now over Asheville. You can see the moisture on the lens. So not only did we lose Brad Panovich to a tornado warning in Watauga County, but we lost Jason Byer to a flash flood warning up there in the mountains. So Tim, to echo your point, it is very much already here and already happening when you consider the predecessor rain event. Just how unprecedented was Helene? And I'm not just using the word unprecedented for fun. It truly was unprecedented. We start thinking about these events and how often or how likely they are to reoccur. Once every 100 years, once every 500 years, once in every 1,000 years. That's how unprecedented Helene was, but it wasn't even just Helene. Those of you watching along eastern North Carolina coast, you might recall we had 2 1 in 1,000 year events in close proximity to each other a year ago. It's the unnamed potential tropical cyclone 8. Is that right, Corey?
That's right. And just keep in mind, these 2 storms happen only about 3 weeks apart. So absolutely remarkable to have 2 events of that magnitude, 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000 level rainfall in opposite ends of the state. These were not connected events. In some cases, it would be easy to say, well, one event led to heavy rain in this part of the state and then it moved over another part of the state. That wasn't the case here. Potential tropical cyclone 8 was long gone before Helene and its predecessor rainfall moved through. We've had now 9 total storms over the past 25 years that have brought at least 18 inches of rain somewhere in North Carolina. So even though the data would suggest it's a 1 in 1,000 level event, in all likelihood, it is not that rare of an event. So now we can look at what Helene did and how it compares to events like the flood in 1916. I think the most remarkable comparison is just south of Asheville in Fletcher. This is on the French Broad River as it's running toward the Asheville area. It crested 10 feet higher during Helene than it did back in 1916. Just absolutely amazing to think about a river getting that much further above what was already an extreme record level. Also, I think we don't just have to limit this to Western North Carolina. We can think about Helene's place in all the hurricanes that have affected our state. The only storm I think that really rivals Helene is Florence back in 2018 for a lot of the same reasons, in that Florence was the most extreme event Eastern North Carolina has ever seen. The only other storm in our state's history that produced more than 30 inches of rainfall in parts of the state. I think the widespread scale of both storms also stands out. You think about an event like Tropical Storm Fred in 2021. That was a big event along the Pigeon River and other parts of the mountains. But it was also fairly localized in that it was only a handful of counties that were seeing those effects. With Helene, we were basically looking at the entire western third of the state getting record rainfall totals, setting record river and flood levels. And again, that's similar to what we saw from Florence. So unfortunately, we already know that the death toll from Helene has surpassed Florence. It's surpassed what we saw from any of those other historical storms, including back in July of 1916. And I saw just today the governor's office has estimated $53 billion in damage in the western part of the state from Helene. So it looks like it will also be, by a pretty good margin, the most damaging and costliest storm in our state's history.